Okay, good evening. It's okay if some of you probably have, are not yet done with the questionnaires. We're just going to start our discussion today. We're going to be discussing the results of the questionnaires and what they mean, basically, from a theoretical point of view, and what research has revealed in terms of its associations with certain aspects that we can probably relate to as well. So if I may share my slide. Okay, so we're gonna, before we continue to the results, I would like to highlight a little bit about the from last week, which was about cultural differences, but in this case, in the context of leadership. And when it comes to CEO behaviors and CEO effectiveness, so what especially this particular study is done by the Globe Project team. So what the study finds generally is the way we understand how leadership should be about, which is the ideal leadership style there, will be affected more or less by the national culture in which we live generally. So national cultural will affect the way we perceive ideal leadership style. And when the style that we perceive to be good match with the behaviors that are expressed by CEOs or leaders in this case, that will determine generally the CEO effectiveness. So for example, when the ideal leadership style is more or less linked to being having higher power distance, let's say, and so that and then that's something that is coming out of the CEO, and that can predict the CEO effectiveness. So when there's a fit between the behaviors of the CEOs and the leadership style that is perceived to be what is good within that national context, and that could lead to CEO effectiveness. And some of the values that are being studied, some of the characteristics that are studied include charismatic, value-based leadership, which would include being visionary, inspirational, self-sacrificial, having integrity, decisive, performance-oriented, and then team-oriented leadership with some of the elements. Participative leadership, which has also some elements there. Humane-oriented leadership, autonomous leadership, and self-protective leadership. And so they also the team on the Globe Project tries to understand some of the characteristics that seem to be more universal across all contexts, what seem to be necessary in all contexts. So even though, for example, in this particular model, they predict and they found that the fit between the ideal leadership style in one national context and the actual behaviors of the CEOs would predict CEO effectiveness. But they also try to find, they would like to try to find some of their more universal characteristics that seem to be linked to what they call top management team dedication, which is TMT here on the slide, TMT dedication, and firm competitive performance. So what they found, some of these characteristics are found to be positively correlated with TMT dedication. So the CEOs that are regarded as inspirational, visionary, having integrity, performance-oriented, administratively competent, diplomatic, self-sacrificial, human-oriented, being a team integrator, being decisive, being bureaucratic as well. In that case, it's more related to making sure that things are in place and things like that. The And while some of the characteristics that are found to be negatively correlated, meaning that the higher the CEO being malevolent, let's say, the lower the TMT dedication. So, and then the higher, let's say, the autocratic level of the CEO, the lower the TMT dedication in this case. So the negative correlations would indicate that, generally these characteristics are not expected coming out of a CEO generally. So all the negatives, all being autonomous, self-centered, autocratic, internally competitive, malevolent, would be some of the characteristics that seem to be negatively correlated with TMT dedication. And that's more or less similar for firm competitive performance, yeah, even though it's not not exactly the same correlations. And so here, what they found also, there's a difference between the high performing CEOs and the underperforming CEOs. In terms of the level of being visionary, being performance oriented, and so on and so forth. So here, what are are grouped to be critical for the mission, let's say, would be visionary, performance-oriented, decisive, inspirational, administratively competent, and having integrity and being diplomatic. And so that separates, quote unquote, separates the high-performing CEOs from the underperforming CEOs. So the darker one, the darker bars would be for the superior CEOs compared to the inferior or the underperforming CEOs. The characteristics that are found to be important would be, being self-sacrificial, being collaborative, in the context of team, being participative, being a team integrator, being bureaucratic as well, which is quite interesting here. And some other aspects that are found to be distinct between the superior and the inferior ones or the underperforming ones would be human orientation, modesty, for status conscious, not too different between the high performing and underperforming. So the gap is rather low. But in here, so for autonomous, being autonomous, let's say, that would be higher for the underperforming CEOs compared to the high performing CEOs. So that would indicate that there needs to be, cross cultures. There seems to be the need for CEOs to be less autonomous, meaning that being more engaged with the whoever would be around. And not also, the underperforming CEOs would be higher on being internally competitive versus the high performing CEOs here. So the research or just the studies overall would reveal that even though, again, there's a if there's a match between the expectation that is perceived to be the characteristics that are perceived to be good within a particular national context, and the actual behaviors of the leaders, that fit would be very much expected, because that is expected to lead to CEO effectiveness, let's say. There are characteristics that seem to be more universally accepted as the characteristics that would highlight higher performing CEOs compared to the underperforming ones. And some of these characteristics would also lead to TMT dedication and firm competitive performance. And so now let's go to the self-assessments. Basically last week we talked more about cultural differences. So it's not really necessarily a link to our own characteristic as an individual. because when we talk about culture, we talk about a group, or a group's characteristic, which is in that case would be the national context. Even though some of the dimensions, for example, for Hofstede's cultural dimensions, power distance, individualism, collectivism, masculinity, femininity, and so on and so forth, they could be applicable in the context of organizations as well. So if we, for example, in an organization, we would understand, let's say that would have something to do with our organization would show perhaps a rather in high power distance situation versus not, let's say. So in today's context, or tonight's context, we will talk more about our own individual tendencies, so which may be linked, can be linked to the cultures or the situations that seem to have fed the way we think about or how we are wired as individuals generally, from three perspectives. One is self-controls. That would be the first questionnaire. The communication style would be the second questionnaire, and conflict management style would be the third questionnaire. So in the idea of self-control is basically how each one of us will view ourselves in relation to others. And recently there has been some developments also in the theory of self-controls. For example, there's a little bit of a transcendental view of self-control, let's say, but then the basic, especially for understanding cross-cultural differences, would be what we call the independent versus interdependent view of the self. So the first one, IND, in the result would indicate independent self-control and versus interdependent one. So the idea would be that, so this in particular will be linked to individualism and collectivism usually, but not necessarily that only, but this particular idea can be linked to masculinity and femininity, because masculinity is usually about, it's about being assertive, aggressive, let's say, but the interdependent view would be more linked to nurturing and so on and so forth, which is linked to femininity. So in this case, the independent view of the self would understand individuals or the self as separate or independent from one another. So as the illustration suggests here, that our self would be seen as distinct from the mother, the father, the sibling, the coworker, friend, and so on and so forth. So they are not, they can be close, but they are not attached. So they're different individuals, quote unquote, different, separate from each other. While the other one, interdependent view of the self, mentally, the individual or the self will see itself, or himself, herself, or themselves as part of each other. So they're mentally, we are parts of one collective whole, generally speaking. So mentally, for example, the mother, the father, and the self will be linked rather intrusively with the self. So the self is part of the mother, father, and vice versa. So which is why, if you imagine how the movement can work for the independent view of the self, it can be, can be pretty free flowing. One can just do whatever it wishes to do, for example, or they wish to do, and versus in the interdependent view would probably need to have everybody to move as well in order to move, because they are parts, all of these different bubbles, quote unquote, would be parts of the self. So the what was quite striking, actually, so it when I was in the States, let's say when I was doing my PhD, my daughter, the very first book that my daughter received was more about being unique, being special. So the book that she received was really about that. And while coming back to Indonesia, so after a couple of years, the very first book that she received was more about what we call in Indonesia to be a gotong royong, or doing things together, collectively. So which is quite interesting. So I thought that, okay, so this is interesting. This is interesting. So it goes from the very beginning of life, where everything is is being nurtured. Things are being nurtured to the kids. One is about being unique, and the other one is more about being collective. So in the context of the workplace, probably the idea of you and I are different, you and I are the same, let's say, and perhaps it can be linked to the individuals being able to do anything creative, anything that they would like to think about, versus, let's say, let's create a large team so that everybody feels involved. Let's gather people to form a large team so that people feel included, let's say. Because you and I are parts of this one whole. I don't want to bother other people for independent self. For example, we depend on each other would be for interdependent self. So it's very different. I should depend on myself. I should depend on other people. I should be honest. I cannot reveal things that hurt people, for example, because we're one in this one connected whole, let's say. So it's difficult if I say something negative, then it can hurt myself too, it can hurt the other. So it's because we're one and the same, versus if we are free flowing individuals, let's say, then I can just easily be honest, in terms of what I can tell people. Importance of being authentic, importance of sticking together. For independent self could be that disagreements become constructive, but interdependent self, because of the closeness, we would try to avoid disagreeing with others. So this is the distribution of the for the undergraduates, through the years. The the way I calculate the independence score in relation to the interdependence score would be, if the gap between the two is within 0.5 or minus 0.5. So in between that would be considered balanced generally. So most of the students would fall into the balance here. But predominantly, other than that, students would fall into being interdependent for the undergraduate. So most of them would be from Indonesia or Indonesians by nationality. Then usually when we have our exchange students from the Netherlands, let's say, are predominantly the Netherlands or Germany, the likelihood that they will get independence score to be the highest, or much higher than the interdependence would be there. So usually it's what we find as well. So which is quite interesting. The way assignments, what we understand, the way assignments are being given to the students in the Netherlands would be, from the way they express it, would be individual, very much individual assignments, and then the people will be directed towards what they achieve individually, let's say, and so on. And then this would be the distribution for the MBA in the business school here in Bandung. So usually the most would again fall into the balance, but then usually at the MBA level, it's either rather balanced between the independence versus interdependence. Throughout the year, it would be more or less like that. At one time, it would be independence dominant, but then at other times it would be interdependent dominance, but more or less it would be more similar. And then here I also have some data from the Swiss ASEAN MBA, where most students would be from Europe. the independent score would be rather higher compared to the interdependent one. So what it implies could be that it may have something to do with how they expect themselves to behave, expect others to behave as well, in relation to how they see themselves, what they expect themselves to do, and so on. So the anybody perhaps would like to say something about the results and what you find or what you found, whether it speaks to the reality, and whether you think that it could be linked to, for example, nationality, the fact that we're parts of our nationality, or more of a result of our employing organization, the job category, or anything at all. Anybody perhaps would like to share your results?
Hello, Pak. Hadri here.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm kind of a bit confused with my results. I'm getting about 5.8 for the IND and 5.26 for my INT. It's rather kind of the same.
Yes,
so
yes.
Probably, I guess the way I'm portraying myself, right? Because I'm working with other nationalities day and night, and I directly report to Dubai and also UK itself. So the way we work itself, the culture itself is currently being influenced by them. Probably it's the way it is right now.
Yes, yes. So the you would imagine that even though it's quite interdependent, let's say we need one another to to do the work, to do any project at all. Let's say the distance would allow for us to be able to do what we have to do independently, for example. So that probably creates this sort of like requirement for balance to take place. Yeah.
Thank you, Pak. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much. Anybody else, perhaps?
Pak.
Yes. Daisy.
Yeah. For my result, for independent I think it's also almost similar with interdependent. For independent is 5.5, and then interdependent 5.3. And then I think this for myself, I think I'm looking for this similar because the responsible, because I don't know, I have should be independent because I need to set up my business actually, and then interdependent also I have a like subordinate to control that running, that's also well. So it is, I think, because of I need to responsible for both of
Yes. So being an owner, so that would allow us to be rather to be able to make decisions, for example, and then we have that responsibility to try to direct, for example, so that has this independent element that at the same time is more on the allowing that what we expect or what we wish to do would be collectively done by the members of the team as well, right? So that creates this interdependence, interdependent nature of the work. So more or less, that you would if it's something that we have been socialized into, then it we can imagine that we would have a rather sort of like balanced nature when it comes to the the self. Yeah. Yes. Thank you very much, Budesi. Perhaps anybody else would like to share?
I would like to share my result.
Yes.
I got 4.8 for IND, and interdependent I got 5, so it's quite similar result. Maybe because of the Desi and Hadri said, because of the responsibility that our working condition needed. So we will need to be interdependent with each other. That's my point lah.
Yes, yes. When the work arrangement is really linked to the others, yeah, in a dominant way, so that would create this interdependence nature as well to a certain extent. So which is quite interesting. So the way this independence and interdependence, in addition to these two aspects being parts of the individuals, they can also be primed. So what it means is that in certain situations, sometimes we can behave in a way that would be linked to that demand of the situation. So in many research, for example, if our work situation would require us to act independently compared to interdependently, then maybe in the beginning we would feel a little bit tired having to do things independently, let's say, but then after a while, because the situation forces us to behave more independently or make decisions more independently, that we become more attuned to this idea of being independent, for example, and vice versa. And so sometimes which is why in the when it comes to cultures, it's about how we become used to something, right? And then at the example that I mentioned at the beginning, generally in the States, let's say, when coming back to Indonesia, the emphasis is different from the very beginning. But then probably when people become adults and then have our different socialization processes, we can either go to become more interdependent or independent, let's say. But naturally, the situations in which we are in would affect how independent or interdependent we are. So which is quite interesting. So for example, one of my students, also not exactly my students, but when we have an exchange student from Austria, for example, she would say that she was a little bit shocked to find out that here in the business school in Bandung, a lot of assignments are group based, and so she didn't really she wasn't really used to having that at all back home in Austria. So it's more individual tasks, assignments. So the idea of being able to or having to work together with other members would be something that she found foreign to her. So that's very interesting, that in different situations, it would be different socialization process. So I should share again, I believe. Okay, so there are some of the studies that would point to certain tendencies of independence and interdependence, being an interdependent self and interdependent self. The independent self would prefer freedom, while the interdependent self would prefer relationships. So sometimes it can be translated into being able to do whatever we want, versus, let's say, whether we would like to maintain relationships. Sometimes when we're more or less balanced, it also would be a little bit tricky whether we would like to maintain the in a good relationship versus I can be on my own independently, let's say, being able to say or do things that is different from the rest of the others, let's say. The independent self would also be less likely to mimic other people's behavior, and exactly because of the distance, the perceived distance between one person and the other, let's say. So it's mentally we would not be likely to mimic other people's behavior because of the distance. So that's what it means by less mimicry. But for interdependent self, we would be more likely to mimic other people's behavior, our behaviors. We can take a look at the illustration where we are very much linked together, and so when we do something, perhaps other people could follow and mentally would like to follow, and vice versa. When other people do something, let's say, so there's a likelihood that others would follow. So this can be translated in business decisions as well. So the independent self would probably not be so much affected by what others use or buy and so on and so forth. It's because it's more about themselves. But for the interdependent self, we would probably we would find and we would expect that when someone, especially when the person is quite powerful, let's say, you would have people who would follow as well certain behaviors of that person. The independent self would also approach something in a positive framing, form of framing, while the interdependent self would approach a type of messaging in a rather sort of like a negative framing. So what it means is that the independent self would say something more related to, do your best, get that. So it's positively framed, versus the interdependent self would be more likely to frame something in a negative framed way. So for example, don't do something or don't do that. So it's more like that. So the positive one would be do that, approach that. Negative one would be don't do that, don't do that. So that can probably have some implications also on the way we would behave as a result of that. The independent self would also be more confrontational in conflict resolution. So which means that we can probably be engaged in a lot of confrontations, disagreements, let's say, would be more likely to be spoken out or expressed by the independent self person. But for interdependent self, we would prefer to compromise more. So meaning that we don't go to the length where we are fully satisfied. So we are okay that if we don't really get something, then it's, as long as it is acceptable for both of the parties, let's say, that is acceptable, we're fine, because of the idea that we're in this together, quote unquote, being interdependent. But in the independent self would be more likely to confront, because of the mentally we are separate, so it's easy to confront. And when to resolve a conflict would be to confront people, and then to try to find the the maximum decision that's best. So what is probably the perfect example of this would be the Dutch way of making a lot of confrontation. So the one thing that our Dutch counterparts would say, in terms of the way they were educated, would be the arguments. It's important to create arguments, and to ask why, and why, because it's something that could be linked to this maximum decision, where the fullest possible good decision would be achieved. Versus it's okay, we don't have to go to that extent, we just keep it as it is, we compromise. That would be more interdependent. The independent self would be less likely to be embarrassed, versus the interdependent self more likely to be embarrassed. So which is why a lot of sayings especially in the eastern part of the world would be, when somebody gets embarrassed, it would be very, very embarrassing. It would be very, very tough for the person to deal with, because the idea of being embarrassed would be very much about threatening the idea of being oneself, or being a person in the first place. So maybe in Indonesian, and for us, or Indonesians would also be would understand this particular idea. For example, when there's something wrong, the very first thing that comes out would be, nanti malu. So malu would be very, very tough to handle. It's something that's very tough, because it's linked to the other individuals. So the versus for the independent self, perhaps, it's not really that important. I can do whatever I want. It's something that has nothing to do with others, and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to be likely to be embarrassed for whatever I would like to do. The independent self would also be more argumentative, versus the interdependent self would be less argumentative. And also in terms of the preferred spatial distance, so meaning that between one person and another, especially we can see this usually in the context of queuing or lining up. The for the independent self, we would like to keep some distance between us and the other person in front of us, for example, when queuing. But then for those of us who would be more in the interdependent situation, it would be, we would prefer less spatial distance, because we're linked together. So when queuing, it can be seen from the the closeness between the people in there. So I happen to find this to have this very funny experience. So when I just came back from the stage, I would get used to this distance between me and the person in front of me when queuing, for example. Then I kept that distance quite, there's that distance. And then somehow, when I'm in the particular store, and then somebody was in the middle of me and the person before in front of me. So the thinking that I had, okay, so who's wrong here? Is it me who's keeping the distance too large, or is it the other person who suddenly gets in the middle between me and the person in front of me? And so okay, so that in a sort of like a conflict situation could happen. So that the expectation would be that whether you're in the way, it's okay to be in the way, for example, or I would like to keep this sort of like privacy, quote unquote, between in distance between me and the other person. The anything that you can think about in terms of managerial implications? I think we've talked about some of the things. Perhaps some of the behaviors that you would expect coming from those who would be more independently dominant versus the interdependent. Anybody, perhaps?
Maybe I can share something.
Yes,
we can say independent and dependent from the information that are given is Dr. here have explained, is depend to the culture identity of individual. That's what I can understand. And how the culture of the community or the area that we are actually being in that particular time. There is a one time happened. This is a long time ago. There is a one incident of a dress code of journalists coming for our official meeting. So it was somehow being criticized by other people. And then when our mayor said that you're supposed to dress according to the value or the place, you have to give a respect. But because it's become so sensitive, and people saying that the mayor do not have a understanding of the place of Penang, he was transferred in 24 hours.
Okay. Yes. So even within you could imagine one country, let's say, we would have some of the conflict when it comes to how you expect yourself to be independent and interdependent. So in that case, perhaps in Penang, it would be one expectation, let's say, it being interdependent within that context, but then there's someone saying something about it, and then it can be seen as not really paying attention to what's accepted, for example, in that area. So yeah, even in our Indonesian context, we also have that particular instance where even when we're one country, there's this collectiveness would be built within this different context, and then somehow we would need to adjust to certain to a great extent to be able to to understand what's really accepted within that. So that that's about that adds a layer to the being interdependent within one context, and then if we compare with others, for example, then our independence would also be part of that, because independence as linked to each one of the groups that are being for example, the independence of being in one place and versus the independence of people coming from a different place, for example. Sometimes it can be quite tricky when it comes to the adjustment process. So the Mr. Zan also has something here. I prefer freedom, but at the same time, I have to be responsible for the others. Feeling some concern. Yes, so it can be. Organization and community. Yes, organization and community. That can also be because you have organization as one interdependent being, and then community as one interdependent being, but then as their own, they can be seen as independent somehow, and so it can be the argumentation that takes place would be part of that independent self idea. It's easier to be argumentative when you have these two interdependent beings trying to argue for something, for example. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. What's found also in one of these one of the studies when it comes to independence and interdependent self would be that if we have a collectivistic or rather interdependent value orientation, but then there's also individualistic or more independent self-control being embraced, it would lead overall to originality of ideas. So meaning that individuals being able to express what they think about what is important, what is necessary, but at the same time having this collective or interdependent or more harmony oriented nature would be good to create originality of ideas. So some good combination of both principles would be sought after. So the second one now about communication styles. And we can have some time also to maybe some have not been able to do the calculation, but we can have some time to do that for those of you who haven't had a chance to calculate. But the second one is on communication styles. Yeah, it would reveal whether we would be more dominant on action orientation or process orientation, people orientation, and idea orientation. So for people orientation, for action orientation, which is the first style, we would be talking more about results, objectives, achieving, doing something. But for process-oriented people, we would be more about strategies, organization, structure, facts, details. While for people-oriented communication, we would be more about how to bridge between one and the other person, which is more about communication, which is more about relationship, about teamwork. And the last one, idea-oriented communication, is more about concepts, theories, grand designs, and innovations. So the more about the as the name suggests, it's more about idea. So action-oriented people would be more about these, more pragmatic, more decisive. It's more direct to the point because it's action orientation, and it's more, we're probably going to be more impatient because we want to go and achieve certain things. So the way we communicate, what do you get? What's the point of it all? Let's go to the point of what we want to do, without having to do all kinds of things. So it's about results, efficiency, deadlines, decisions, and more. This perhaps as the motto, it would be. If you really want it, get it. So it's more that goal-oriented type of communication. While the second one, the process-oriented communication, would be more about facts. So perhaps the if action-oriented person would be, let's just do it. The process-oriented person would be more about wait, let's try to lay out all the things necessary. Let's try to go step by step. Don't rush, which is patient, being patient compared to the action-oriented, more impatient. Let's try to have everything in place. Let's do the planning. Let's organize. So it's the communication would be more about making things more systematic, more factual, and not emotional. It's not linked to any emotion at all. It's more about how the facts are coming together in order for us to do what we are expected to do, let's say, or to achieve. So the motto could be something along this line: life is a complex process. Because it's complex, that it needs we need to understand what's the process, what's the stages, and so on. For people-oriented communication, it's more about, as the name suggests as well, it's more about people, communication, feelings. We need to understand each other. Let's say we need to create this harmonious relationship. We need to be empathetic. We need to be warm. We need to be sensitive to other people's emotions, and so on and so forth. And the motto could be to always want to avoid confrontation, because it's about the bridging of all the people that are involved, and we don't want any confrontation. And the last one is idea-oriented communication. It is more about opportunities, alternatives, juggling all the ideas. Maybe the person will come across as very imaginative, creative, full of ideas, provocative as well. Why not we do this? Why not something to, and so juggling all the possibilities. And the motto that the person has can be critical whenever necessary. Why not this? Why is this like this? Why not doing this, and so on and so forth. So this is the distribution of this questionnaire throughout the years. Usually the dominant one would be communication, the people-oriented communication. So it's always the first dominant, the dominant one, the first one, the highest one. And the second one usually is the process-oriented communication, and then the third one would be action and idea. And let's talk about the managerial implications, but then I'd like to show first for the MBA students, usually it's also more or less similar. The people first, and then the process second. Either process or people, then idea and action would be sometimes it's action, sometimes it's idea. And then compare with the Swiss ASEAN MBA, like in the first questionnaire. Usually the first one can be either action for the first batch. sorry, the people, yeah, this was during the pandemic for the 2021 batch, yeah, so perhaps it has something to do with that as well. So it's more about how we connect with people and so on, but then action is still very, very high there. And then that's the same thing in the second batch of the Swiss and ASEAN MBA program students. Yeah, the action would be quite high, but then idea is the second. So comparing that to this and this, where action would be usually not really that dominant. Yeah, sometimes the thing that I can notice when it comes to working together and communicating, for example, my colleagues that are in the same area as me, would be more about having to make sure that when we say something, it's something that's not hurtful to other people. It's not something that's too honest. Something that's too honest can be seen as not really necessarily right. Saying something that is hurtful can be quite tricky. Yeah. So what that can mean would be, sometimes if we want to do something, if we want to go to the goal, let's say it's a little bit difficult because everyone would have a certain perception about that action, so it's difficult to come across and go get to the point, let's say. So it's difficult. And vice versa, sometimes that I find also that it's easier for my colleagues from the other parts of the world, would be the Western part, would say what they wish to say and think. And sometimes it could create this conflict and conflict with our colleagues from Indonesia, for example, and then to not be able to respond because it's too direct, let's say, of a statement, let's say. It's more action-oriented communication, let's say. So sometimes it can happen. Anybody would like to say something about some of the experiences, perhaps with the action process, people idea, and whether the results that you have would reflect the tendencies generally?
Okay, Pak.
Yes, please.
For me, I got the total amount for the style 3 is higher than the other, so I think I come up to the
Yes.
people. Yeah. And I see also in your slide about the undergraduate, also the ITB student.
Yes, ITB student.
So
yeah.
I think is it because our culture maybe it's if I compare your distributive on undergraduate and also in your MBA, I think all the result is higher in the people side, right? But when when I see the SA, it's mean a Swiss
Swiss ASEAN.
Swiss ASEAN is different, right? So maybe it depend on our culture. So it's make us more people than the others, and action and so on. Yeah. And then I want to ask about, is that exact style that should be we have in a specific profession, or is just like you just know what your type of style, or is there any correlation with the profession?
Yes. So that's a very interesting question, Budesi. So I get that it may have something to do with the profession as well. So I don't have the evidence at the moment, but more on the stories that people usually share. So for example, in a finance related profession, let's say you would be expected to be more efficient, let's say perhaps in the way you would communicate, because it's about numbers. And then you would be expected to sort of like be more action oriented when it comes to communication. So this that whether it's done or not, something like that. But in a different, probably more of a service type of profession, let's say, probably it's more linked to people or process, let's say, because you would like to make sure that the what you deliver would be appropriate enough to be delivered. So the way you would, the fact that you would really need to understand the details of how things are, for example, so that the things that you would like to serve to people would be there. Perhaps it would be more process or people, because it's, you talk about the maintaining the relationship, let's say. So you would find that the in the service profession perhaps is more people generally that is expected, because the understanding, it's more about the understanding of each one's concern, let's say, the bridging of the emotion, let's say, and so on. In the international context, usually we would expect to have more or less all of the aspects, because it's usually we would give certain deadlines, let's say, to make sure that it becomes a structure for us to work together, because sometimes it would be difficult to keep up with one another because of the distance. So that is necessary. But then also the steps, which is more related to the process, and then understanding that people probably would have all kinds of things that they will do. So if there's any expectation, any delay, perhaps usually it is very much appreciated when we express that understanding also. And in a virtual meetings, usually you would be expected to have to come up with our ideas as well, to come up with alternatives, let's say, when it comes to let's say having any agreement at all. So usually it's a little bit of everything for but then when we talk about specific profession as a specific I do think that there's a dominant communication style. Sometimes it affects then how you would be communicating. Does that address your question, Bu Desi?
Yeah, Pak. Thank you.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
Pak-
Please.
Linda here.
Yeah, it's Linda. Please, Ms. Linda.
I think it's just I think it's related to this question. Sorry, wait. Okay. Because for this question, the highest number I get for the process, and the second highest people. I think it's really related to my working experience for the past 5 years, because that was the longest working experience in the same place. So basically, I was working in government agencies with which we practically always reminded about the hierarchy, about the power, and you need to know your place in the agency. So basically, I think the process, the highest mark for me, the process here really explain about the organization, the hierarchy of work there, and the process of working. The procedure of the working, and how you want to talk to the higher people. And then the second highest mark is the people. I think I really I try to avoid confronting with the bosses, because usually we would ask to go to analyze the project or the task ourselves, but at the end of the day, the decision always made by the higher management. So if we try to retaliate or anything, it really not at look good to us lah. So it's better for us to just avoid the confrontation, or accept the decision made.
Yes. Thank you very much, Ms. Linda. So the process and people coming together, it can mean for us would be to try to when communicating, let's say that we understand that there's a hierarchical process, when we want to do something, there's this set of stages, for example, in order to to pass a particular thing, let's say, and then linking that to people would mean that there's a lack of incentive, for example, to try to confront, because there's some expectations that it may be negative impact when there's a confrontation, let's say. And so usually we would expect that that's something that would be applicable in our organization, for example, knowing that in some organizations, perhaps because the nature of the organization would be to try to come up with all kinds of ideas, let's say being creative and so on and so forth, then people would be expected to just throw in ideas, or confront each other and so on and so forth, and then not really necessarily paying attention to certain sort of like procedures and so on. Sometimes I find also in some organizations they tend to work like that. Let's say they don't like all the procedures, the bureaucracy, and so on and so forth. But then in some, we would expect that things would be more in place, more conserved when it comes to the processes of how we would like to get things done, let's say. So the way we expect ourselves to communicate in these aspects, would be different in these two different contexts. Yes, so it can be linked to that. The country, also to the profession, can be linked to the type of organization that we become part of as well. So hopefully we can by now we can sort of like juggle some of the pluses and minuses of each one of the communication styles, and perhaps in some contexts it would be more expected, in some other contexts it would not be. Some of the communication styles would not be expected, but then sometimes we also talk about progress, sometimes we also talk about how to maintain things. So progress versus something to maintain would be linked to the way we would communicate as well, and it can be quite tricky. Again, as I mentioned. Yes, please.
Yeah, I want to share my score.
Yes.
So I have my score equal in terms of style 1 and style 3 is between action and people.
Action, yeah.
Because it may be due to my previous job nature, because I work in finance industry. So every day I have to face like intense deadline. For example, I have to process certain document to the another site. So because we need constant communication. For example, the billing team needs to communicate with the sales department so that they can provide the information to us. So we constantly are meeting up the deadlines. So in order to collaborate well with the other departments, for example, sales department, because they have to provide the information for us to process the billing information, to issue the invoice to other parties. So we need to communicate well to persuade them so that they won't feel frustrated. Although I am an action-oriented person, that I want fast, efficient, and I want something to be done quickly. But in terms to persuade others to collaborate with me well, I have to have a good communication style to persuade them so that they can work together with me in a well manner. Yeah. So this is how basically I have these two styles in my communication style.
Yes, thank you so much. I would also notice that when it comes to, let's say, giving let's say my colleagues from the finance department would be more more about whether this can be accepted or not, you would take this or not, something like that. So it's more action oriented, let's say, to the point. But then at the same time, sometimes if my colleagues do not really approach some of us in a manner that would be more acceptable, such as you would understand the situations of the person, let's say, and so on and so forth. It can, it can be quite frustrating and create this sort of like conflict.
Yeah, sometimes.
So yeah,
Sometimes because we are mostly we communicate through Skype or email. So sometimes we send the email to them. Maybe the way of the word usage is not appropriate, so they ignore our email. So we have to communicate through Skype or maybe Skype video. So face-to-face interaction. So it requires like very good communication style and make them to be persuasive, to make them listen to our instruction and provide the details that we want.
Yes, and so that's also about the some of the difference between having or an email communication versus a face-to-face communication. Let's say that we can see the gestures and then what the overall aura when we're speaking more with at least with camera face-to-face and versus email. Sometimes it can be there's some missing message in the one form or the other, let's say. Yes, thank you so much, Mrs. And everybody. So I think that we can move on to the next one. Yes, the next one is conflict management styles. I think that perhaps in some of the other instances, you probably have had this as well. So this is one major framework when it comes to conflict management, especially the styles of conflict management. Sometimes it's the framework is called the conflict handling style, interpersonal conflict management style, or conflict styles, but more or less a similar thing. So the way we handle or manage conflicts can differ depending on the extent to which we are concerned for ourselves and the extent to which we are concerned for others. So if we have high concern for the self and high concern for others, meaning that high assertiveness and high cooperativeness, it will be called integrating or collaborating. And if we have low concern for the self and low concern for others, it would be avoiding. So that would be the bottom right, low assertiveness and low cooperativeness. And if we're high on the concern for the self and low on the concern for others, we would be dominating. So the way we handle the conflict would be dominating, and vice versa. For a low assertiveness and high concern for others or high cooperativeness, it would be called accommodating or obliging. Meaning that we just give in to the requests or concerns for others, but not necessarily ourselves. And if we fall in the middle, it would be compromising. So we don't go to the extent where all the parties are fully satisfied, but we come to a compromise. We come to an agreement that this is what is to be taken or decided, let's say. And so this would be the distribution of the results, usually across all the different batches of students. Usually the dominant one would be integrating, the highest one across all the classes here. And the second one would be compromising, and the third one would be obliging, and the fourth and fifth, it could alternate between dominating and avoiding. And so what it's found is that other than integrating, so the most preferred conflict management style would be compromising here, so which falls into the general tendency for those of us who would be more interdependent generally, that compromising would be more preferred. The obliging also tends to be higher than dominating here. And so in avoiding is the lowest, but the mean would be higher than 4. So this is of a scale of 7. So 4 would be somehow in the middle. So a score higher than 4 would mean that there's a likelihood that sometimes, and in a lot of cases, that the avoiding style may also come out as well. That people do not really necessarily care to address a particular thing at all. Some of the other, so style number 1 is integrating, style number 2 is avoiding, number 3 is dominating, number 4 obliging, accommodating, and 5 is compromising. And this would be for the MBA students. In across all the classes, including the Swiss Asian MBA, and also the ITB's MBAs, would be integrating at as the highest, and the avoiding would be the lowest, and compromising would be more or less the second, and then obliging. Okay, so anybody would like to share? And what's the implication that you feel when it comes to having a certain conflict management style, let's say?
Pak,
Yes.
I think for my result is almost the same. Yeah, I mean the first one is integrating and the least is avoiding. I want to ask, it's avoiding means that we don't care about this conflict, or we don't want to try to what's that to handle this conflict.
Yes.
By avoiding, yeah.
Yes. So in this case, the bottom line would be that we don't think that it's concerning for us, and we don't and we don't want to think about addressing the issue at all, because it's not something that we want to approach. So it's more about avoiding the conflict altogether. So let's say, even though that it may have something to do with us, but we don't want to deal with that. So we just keep being involved in that issue, let's say, because it and even though that issue is something that may impact us and the others, let's say I would have a low emphasis on making an effort to deal with the conflict or address the issue or give my thought, for example, to start the conversation in the first place. So it's meaning that it's more, absence of confronting. So it's more related to that, the avoiding.
Okay, Pak. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Happy here.
Yes, please.
Yeah, for my results, right, I'm having mostly on style 1 and style 5, which is integrating, collaborating, and compromising as well. So it goes the same numbers as 6 or 7 for both. But I guess for the integration, right, and collaborating, for a managerial position, we do need the collaboration between the product lines, departments, and interdepartment itself as a company.
Yes.
And yeah, so for the style 5 compromising, I'm not sure on this, but what I'm looking at compromising probably is to have what we call this is openness to each and every team members
Yes.
to have a full vision and mission on one path that we are looking at. So there should be no, for me myself, there should be no secrets between us, so we can know what's our weaknesses and our advantage in our company. So
Yes, yes. So the usually the integrating and compromising styles are seen as a rather problem-solving type of conflict management. So what it means is that we're concerned about how to work things out together. So I have my concerns put out there, and I allow people to express their concerns, and we try to either compromise or make sure that we're all fully satisfied, let's say, with that. So it's sometimes it's not easy because interdepartmental decisions, usually we would have all the different concerns, let's say, but the openness, as you mentioned, that the would be critical to sort of like try to bring together all the concerns. And sometimes the exactly because we would find it effortful to express our ideas, to allow for others to express their ideas, and then to try to integrate them. Sometimes it would be difficult for a lot for some of us, at least, to sort of like get to that mode of trying to to spend time to integrate the thoughts and or if compromising needs to be happening. Sometimes it's not that easy, but usually, yes. So these two would be seen and will be seen as more constructive forms of conflict management. In the case of, let's say, even though it's not really what we focus on in this class, but let's say when it comes to harassment issue that's happening in an organization, let's say if the leader is more on the avoiding part, it would be a conflict would evolve into a bullying conflict in the workplace, because we don't address, so the leader doesn't address the issue, doesn't try to allow for the voices to come out and then to try to resolve things, let's say. So it's more of a laissez-faire type of leadership. So if the leadership style is more on the avoiding part, let's say, it would be such a conflict that deals with some emotions, let's say, could lead to a bullying form of a conflict, where one would degrade some of the others in the scene. So usually the integrating and the compromising would be seen as more appropriate to sort of like address any issue. But sometimes in some contexts, when it's too heated, let's say things are too heated, avoiding style to a certain extent would help, because it would integrating would involve a lot of thoughts being put out there, a lot of heat, for example, and so on and so forth. Sometimes things get emotional, so sometimes avoidance would be also constructive in a way, because to temper down the entire heat or the conflict that would arise. So somehow it's more on the the art of switching from one form to the other somehow. And so perhaps our occupation would have something to do with the fact that we probably would be higher on one versus another. Say our nation or our ethnicity, perhaps also our some socioeconomic background would also be linked to that as well. And so on and so forth. So basically, the groups where we have been socialized to understand that something is important in the first place, let's say, not in the context of conflict management, it would be whether we think that having a rather integrating type would be preferred, or avoiding would be preferred, and so on and so forth. There's some studies here that would highlight some of the tendencies for especially how self-controls, the concept we talked about in the beginning, and conflict management styles. So the if the we go back to the scale, biconstruals here would mean that the individuals that would score higher than 4 out of 7 for independence and interdependence. So usually they would be categorized as biconstruals, but when independents are those that have a high score above 4 on independence, but then lower than 4 on interdependence, and vice versa. So interdependence would be categorized as those with a high score above 4 on interdependence, but then a lower than 4 on independence. Ambivalence would be those of us who would be who would score lower than 4 on both self-controls and on both self-controls, independence and interdependence. So what this study finds is that biconstruals, independence, and interdependence would tend to approach an issue in an integrating and compromising way. So so meaning that, because there's a concern for ourselves, there's a concern for others, we would find ourselves wanting to make sure that all the concerns are being satisfied somehow. And that is true for all of the biconstruals, independence, and interdependence compared to the ambivalence. And biconstruals also tend to use emotional expressions. So so perhaps it would be more linked to the fact that when having a quote unquote a disagreement, a conflict, it's necessary to sort of like create a bridge between the one person and the other, us and the other. So what it means is that emotional expression can act as that bridge between us and the other person in there. As opposed to being a little bit silent on the how we express ourselves. Let's say, so biconstruals tend to be showing more emotional expressions compared to ambivalence. Those of us who would be lower on both self-controls. And biconstruals also tend to be more dominating, so may come across as dominating when it comes to conflict management, then interdependence and ambivalence. So it makes sense because biconstruals also have a independent side, which means that it would be more dominating, generally. So compared to interdependence that want to be, that feel like we are sticking together. So we as one whole, let's say. And then interdependence and ambivalence would also tend to use a third-party help. So this is not something that is theorized in the conflict management style, the framework of conflict management style, but it is nonetheless something that can be seen as one approach to conflict management, which is third-party help. So this is more used. So third-party help is more used by interdependence and ambivalence. So what it means is that instead of directly addressing the issue, confronting the issue to whoever we're dealing with, especially if we're dealing with those of us who would probably be more interdependent, it's probably more constructive and useful to use a third-party help or someone that's not part of the scene, but there's someone that can be trusted, or a party that can be trusted by both, let's say, that can mediate the the conflict between one and the other. So perhaps when we have organization versus community, or different types of organizations or different units, it would probably be helpful if there's a third-party help or a third party that could help in the process of conflict management, because some of us would prefer that as well. So especially those of us who would be scoring higher on interdependence, and those that are lower on interdependence and independence. So not confronting the issue to to the face of the others. And what's also interesting here, ambivalents tend to use neglect more than by construals, independence and interdependence. By neglect, it means a more passive-aggressive type of conflict management here, and which is usually seen as not constructive. So which means that it would be tricky to deal with this type of behavior or way of dealing with conflicts. Because the approach that is shown would be passive aggressive. So the if we can think about some of the solutions to that, would be that to try to get the sense of self, whether it's the independent versus being interdependent, because ambivalence would not be sure about whether they are independent or interdependent. So they don't have that sense of independence or being interdependent, so meaning that it's probably difficult to express the conflict. So the way to express that would be to try to be rather passive aggressive towards those that are in conflict with them.
Pak, can it
Yes.
be as just a question, just to get a more understanding about neglect? Can it be in the situation where they have people with this particular way of management style? If there is another issue, they only focus about how to go further. They don't really bother about solving all other problems. They just neglect. Is that how is it?
So it's more related to how they address the others.
They don't bother about others, about all other issues.
Yes, they're not concerned about the others. So and it's basically not also not concerned. So it's a different from avoiding. Avoiding is more on the I don't want to get involved in that issue. I don't want to confront. I don't want to.
But this is just
Yeah,
not even considering. Don't care.
Yeah, it's more like it's more about saying something negative about the people that are involved in the conflict, but not in a direct way. So it's more like saying negative things, but not directly. But it's about the people, for example, because they're not concerned about there's no sense of or lack of sense of the self, let's say, that how it impact them versus how it impacts also the others, let's say. So it's more on the not really sure how to deal with the how to deal with the conflict. Yeah,
can we say it's almost a borderline with the independent?
The
independent also, they focus, they don't really bother about others. They're more to themselves.
Yes. Yes.
Than we.
Yes. So the independent, the difference with for independence would be that the independence would be would address the person directly. So it's not they don't probably they're gonna talk about the issue with the person more dominating. So that this is, for example, maybe because they understand that what they think would have some value, and then so they would dominate in a way. But neglect is more more passive aggressive. You're addressing you're not really addressing the issue, you're addressing the person. So more on the it's not the actual issue, for example. It's more on the you're saying something outside of that issue, and then it's like more on the negative characteristic of the person or the people that we're dealing with, let's say. It's more passive aggressive. It's like a it's difficult to illustrate that. Yeah, so maybe in some movies perhaps it would be more when there's a conflict, and then you would say something negative about the person, but not directly to the person's face, but more on the but the person may or may not understand that it is directed at him or her, for example, but it's something negative about so neglecting that there's this that there are concerns that people are talking about. So dominating would be more still about the concerns, let's say my concerns. I mean, this is my concerns, I have to say that more related to that. But neglect, it's more it's like passive aggressive, yeah, more more about the personality of the person, let's say, but not directly in a way that is direct to the person. It may be using a particular language that is more indirect, but it is about the person, for example.
Yeah, thank you. What I understand, independent, they will deal with it, but neglect, they won't deal with it.
The neglect would be yes, they want the neglect would be that they actually would wish they actually would wish to to have the concern understood, for example, but in a way that use a language that is not understandable to the other side, let's say. So the more about that. But not dominating, I want I want what my concern would be. I want my concern, and this is something I would like to address to you directly. Neglect doesn't really have a language necessarily to express that, but instead it's more about attacking the other person. Yes, so the sometimes, because in the workplace, sometimes probably people are being pressured as well, that the sense of self would be, whether we have the independence necessary to make decisions versus, let's say, the fact that we are depending on one another. Let's say it's very pressuring. Let's say sometimes, all kinds of negative things, would also come out as a result, let's say, about the personality of each person. Let's say it can be. So it's not the actual issue anymore.
But,
thank you.
Yes.
Is it neglect is due to maybe like someone behind step someone behind?
It can be linked to that. Yes, it's more about
because face-to-face communication, it requires energy and time. So
yes,
instead of facing the situation face-to-face, they will prefer to avoid this situation and just presume their behavior based on their own perception.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So the difference with avoiding would be that I just don't want to enter that. Neglect would mean that I want something done, but then you would use a particular language that is rather negative or more attacking to the other person. So it's you can say that it's also rather avoiding, but not in a way that would be that we would understand to be avoiding. Avoiding simply doesn't want to be part of that. Let's say it's I would like to be away from that, and neglect would be it's unsure whether we would like to be part of that or not, but it feels like we want, but the way we address it would be not directly about the issue itself. It's more about so having the difficulty in trying to get away or to get things across, let's say, but then by being passive aggressive. I'm not really sure if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Does that make sense? So neglect. So it's probably easier to link it to the idea of ambivalence. So ambivalence would be we would not have that high sense of the self as independent, as a meaning that we're separate from one another. We don't see ourselves as separate, but we don't see ourselves either as depending on one another. So because of that lack of sense of self either way, we don't have the capacity to address it. So as an independent, we are able to say it. So the expression would be that we would be able to say something and to express what we want, as an interdependent, we would try to understand, accommodate other people's concern, let's say. But if we are lacking these, or the individuals would not have this sense, then but at the very, we would no matter what, we would probably have our own concerns, and so other people's concerns would still be there as well. But the way we express our concerns, we couldn't find a way to do so. Because of that, then it's more about, not about the issue or our concerns or what other people are concerned about. It's more about trying to be negative about another person's personality, so which is not functional to the talk about the actual issue. So if we link it back to the being ambivalent, it would be more clear generally. Okay, so the next week we'll be talking about types of conflict. So we have touched upon conflict management style in the last section of the tonight's session, and but we're going to talk more about some of the types of conflict which may be linked to the neglect part, which is more related to when conflicts become very, very emotional, let's say. How does it happen and how to handle that? And in addition to that, we will talk about other types of conflict as well. I believe that next week we will also have a forum as well. We will have a forum. So maybe after we wrap up the 2-hour session, we'll have a break for a little bit, and then we will start our forum. And perhaps we will just discuss a case, and maybe everyone can bring in a case of conflict as well, perhaps a case of conflict, and then we will see whether the conflict will highlight a certain type of conflict, let's say. So a conflict can be something that you would let's say you would have a disagreement of some kind, and then we can have everybody share that, and we will try to analyze whether that would be linked to a particular type of conflict, and then perhaps we can offer some solutions perhaps to try to tackle such conflict issues with some of the conflict management approaches.
So
Yes.
for forum next week, we have a same case, and then we prepare our own case. Is it?
So you can simply bring your own case individually, and then we will share it in class. Yes.
Okay.
And you can explain, what the type of what the conflict is about, and we will discuss in relation to the types of conflict and how we think we could approach the conflict better with the conflict management styles or the conflict management approaches.
But the
Mhm.
cases that we have to bring, can it be from the article or journal or in our own working environment?
Yes, I think that it would be it can be either one. I think that it would be if we bring our own case, it would be more personal, which is good, because we would like to try to be able to connect to that. But at the same time, if sometimes we're also intrigued by a particular case of conflict, let's say, and then it's something that may be relevant also to our working environment, let's say, and so that can be something that we can discuss as well. So either one of those, whether it's something that we would find in an article, let's say, and then we would find it intriguing to try to see what we can do with, if we happen to experience that conflict and so on. So it can be either one. I think that's it would be great. Yeah.
Yeah, Pak Andika.
Yes.
Yeah, for personal case, can I paraphrase it, like, for example, like person A or person B, instead of stating their name or the company,
Yes,
Yeah.
you can do that. Yes, that can
we frame it other way.
Yes, so that so I think that's that is also to be fair, yeah, with the to protect the identities.
Yes.
Yes. So we can have so the conflict can be between two organizations, two companies, or two people, let's say, or one person with a group of people, and so on. So we can see. Yes, it can be. It doesn't have to be we don't have to use the real name.
Yeah, I just want to ask, these slides will be shared to Google Classroom, right? Because last week,
yes,
the presentation haven't shared into the Google Classroom. So I'm wondering.
Let's see.
I'm not sure others.
The cultural differences, right? The cultural differences. So it's already there. The cultural differences is already posted. And for tonight's presentation, I will upload right away after this. So can anyone check also, perhaps? So from my side, it's up there already, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah. Culture differences, I found it.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Then for tonight's presentation, I will also upload. Okay. So any other question, perhaps? So an example of neglect would be, when some kind of a black campaign against a person, for example, that can be seen as a neglect as well, or like a particular approach where we paint a negative picture of a person, let's say. So instead of addressing the issue directly, more about having all those side behaviors. Yes, I think that if there's no more question, perhaps we will call it a night for tonight, and I will upload the presentation as well after this. So feel free to let me know if there's anything, if there's any question, if you would like to discuss anything. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak.
Thank you, Pak.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak.
Thank you.